All right, so we're here at the Milwaukee Makerspace. It's Model Monday, once again, that special time of the week when we get together and we model stuff here at the Norwich location of the Milwaukee Makerspace. We have one student in class today, and when we have one student, that student gets to pick what we're doing. We no longer do what I want to do, and we do what that student wants to do. It's the plus of like coming to an in-person fusion class, or joining us online is if you're the only one, it's your day. And Mike here decided like, hey, you know, what would be cool is if we went down the menu, because you know we tend to draw things a certain way, and maybe I focus on more tools, on a select number of tools, right? And it'd be fun to try, you know, just kind of go top down and see what every one of these tools in the create menu does. And we're literally just going to work from top to bottom here. And hopefully Mike will have a question or two as we draw a thing or figure out how to do things. Some of these I might skip over because honestly, I've not used the drive tool. But you know, maybe we'll skip it at first and then come back to it at the end and see if we can figure out. I don't think I've ever done a boundary fill. Oh, maybe I have done a boundary fill. But anyway, so we'll start at the top. The very first component, or the very first menu item at the top of the create menu, is this new component option, right? So a component is kind of what we have going when we start a new document, right? So this, in my browser here, this is an unsaved component. So my document is a component, and a component is a series of items. It's all like the sketches and bodies and planes and canvases and various things that you would insert into a drawing. It's all of those kind of things in a folder, basically. So if we click on Create and then say New Component, it'll give us this new component window, and we can give our component a name. This is component 1, I guess, works for us right now, but so I'm just going to call it component. And we're making this a blank component. It's an empty component. So it's not made up of existing things in our drawing already. If we had bodies already drawn, if we had three-dimensional shapes already drawn, we could make those bodies into components using this little checkbox here that says from bodies. And we're making this an internal component. So if you make an external component, that means you're basically making a new document. So you're making a document somewhere else, and you can give it a location. You know, somewhere over here in your file structure, you can make an external component, make a new document, basically. And then, you know, the other option here in this new component window is an option for standard or for sheet metal. So normally, we haven't done a whole lot of sheet metal stuff in this class, but we certainly could, I guess. Sheet metal is pretty cool. It's a super flexible material, no pun intended. And but for right now, let's just go ahead and make a standard component. And I'm just going to name it, like I said, component. And then I'll go ahead and say OK. And now it makes us a new component over here in our browser. You can see there's a little radio button next to that component. This little thing right here. If I hover over this unsaved component here, I can click on that, and that's kind of an active button. So whichever component has this little active button next to it, as we continue down the Create menu, like creating a sketch or extruding something, it will extrude or create that sketch inside of the active component that you have selected in your browser here. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. So speaking of creating sketches, that's the next object in our Create menu. So if I click on the Create menu and choose this Create Sketch option here, now we get that familiar thing here in Fusion where we've got our 3 drawing surfaces that we can choose. And if I pick one of them, now all of our menus change up at the top. So we've got our sketching menu here, our Create Sketching menu. We've got our Modify Sketching menu. We've got our constraints, so we've got rules that we can add to a sketch. Now I suppose like in this mission of like going from top down in the Create menu, maybe we'll kind of glance over that we're in like a whole new Create menu now. It's like one Create menu just led us to another one. So instead of going through everything in the sketching Create window, although it's an interesting idea, maybe I'll do that for a future class, is we'll go through every option in the sketching menu. But for now, let's just go ahead and let's make a rectangle. Actually, you know what? Rectangles are boring. We make a lot of rectangles. Let's make a shape that we don't make a whole lot, because that's kind of the point of this class here, right? Let's make an ellipse. We don't make a lot of ellipses, right? Or a polygon. I'm going to go ahead and make a circumscribed polygon, because why not? And if you're ever using a tool for the first time, you could just kind of stop, and it'll tell you what to do with the tool. So here it says to place the center point. So I'm going to go ahead and click one time to place the center point. And now I'll move my mouse out, and now it tells me again, place a point on the polygon. But I can also see I've got a dimension measurement here, so I can enter in a dimension of, say, 1 inch. And then if I hit the Tab key, whenever you have more than one measurement that's available for editing here, when you're creating a sketch or extruding anything, you can hit the Tab key and you can bounce back and forth between those 2 measurements. And now I can specify a number of polygon sides. I can also kind of give this an angle here if it needs to go to be at a certain angle. As I'm drawing this, I can use my mouse and move them to those different locations. And then I'll hit enter. And now I've got a nice little polygon here.
Okay, how would you set your angle? I don't see anything coming up for that.
Well, I didn't set my angle like with a number. However, I could set my angle now. I could like give it a specific dimension now if I wanted to by adding a constraint. So right now my polygon here, my 8-sided polygon, is blue, and you'll know if when your lines are blue, it means your sketch is not fully constrained, so it's not kind of fully locked in position and rotation. But we can add a constraint that would lock it into position. So say if we know we wanted in this kind of vertical orientation where I've got 2 of my side walls facing straight up like this, in my constraints menu I could choose this vertical horizontal option.
Yes.
And I could pick one of those lines and it would add that.
As an example, let's say I'm looking at 15, 20 degree angle here. I haven't clicked OK. Where it's still blue, for example, and kind of swing your cursor around to the right.
Like this?
Here, so it's like a 15 or 20 degree angle, just roughly.
Yeah. So if we want,
and let's say you want to set that to be a specific angle from the horizontal plane.
Sure. So I think the way that I would probably do that to set a specific angle on here is I would place it in here in some way, shape, or form, and then I would draw another line. So if I use my line tool and I draw one more line here, kind of straight out horizontally, And now, instead of using my constraints menu to give this position, I can use the sketch dimension option. So if I click on create and then come down to sketch dimension, now I can specify my line that I just kind of drew, and then the next line, a line that I want to make that angle measurement to. And if I highlight both of those
I was
lines,
asking how to set the angle of your polygon.
yeah.
Line.
So you mean like?
Let's say you want that in an exact 45 for some reason.
So then I would just place that and then type 45, and then it'll snap that to a 45-degree angle. Does that make sense? Now I could change that to, like, say 15.
Okay.
Yeah. And then these measurements you can kind of put wherever you need them to be. Alright, cool. So now that we've got our sketch dimensioned here, you know, I will say a lot of times these lines that I just place in here in order to use as a guide for another object, I'll often turn those into construction lines. So you can do that by hitting the X key, or in the line type options here in our sketch palette menu or window, we can just click on this button here that changes the line type to construction line. Alright, so I'm going to click Finish Sketch here. Now normally I'm a big fan of naming sketches, so I always encourage people to name sketches as they make them, name bodies as they make them. So we've got a sketches folder now inside of our component here, and I'm just going to call this Octagon. Okay, and now we can look at what the next option is here in our create menu. So the next option is another one of these options that's like makes us go into a whole nother realm, like that create sketch option led us to a whole different set of tools where we could make two-dimensional objects. This create form option here leads us to one of those whole other realms here. So we'll just kind of delve into that for a minute as we're going from top to bottom here as best as we can. So if I click that create form option here, this is again, we've got a whole new create menu, and this create menu is full of all sorts of shapes that you can you could think of them more as like balls of clay, I suppose you could say. So as opposed to a solid object, which is normally what we model in Fusion, we're making like, these are kind of like the balls of clay. So for example, this quad sphere, if I choose this quad ball option and I pick a plane to draw that on, and I just kind of picked a point here, and now this makes a ball, and I can make this bigger, and I've got a measurement here that I can type in if I want to. So if I make that 2 inches, I can change the number of span faces here. So this is going to be you can see my ball is made up of a number of, let's say, plane segments, let's call them that, or faces here, or different number of faces, and I can change this to say 6. And you can see I've got a lot more faces now. And that's important because those faces we can then kind of push or pull around. So after I say give it a number of faces. I can give it a symmetry here. I'm gonna not do that, because again, this is a whole ball of wax here. But if I choose OK, the main thing that you can do in this area now is all of these faces. I feel like it's in the modify menu. Again, I don't do this a whole lot. Maybe it's edit form? Yeah. So in this modify menu, I chose the very first option, which is edit form, and I can pick one of these faces, and now I've got this little widget thing, this little move widget that'll be familiar with you, and I can push or pull this. So again, I kind of think about this as a piece of clay. I can move this, pull this piece of clay out towards me and kind of make a shape like that. I can push it back in. I can expand or contract the size of this face if I want to, just in one axis or in multiple axes. So that's, here, let me kind of zoom into this widget a little bit more so you can see all the tools on here. And there's a lot of very similar widgets to this. So the arrows obviously move in one direction or another. And these little square widgets that kind of are on the planes between two arrows, these will let you to move in two directions at the same time. Then there's the little lines that connect, or lines that are to the right or to the left of those squares, and those are like scaling lines. So one line lets me scale in kind of this X direction, this other line lets me scale in this Y direction, and then there's the in-between line that scales uniformly in both X and Y directions there. I can also, I think, add more segments here. Again, this is kind of a whole ball of wax here, and maybe, you know, we can delve into this mesh area in a later class, but for the sake of going through the create menu in the solid workspace, I'll kind of leave it at that for now. I can say okay. In fact, I think I can click on, you know, more of these things at once, and I don't have to say okay before I stop moving. This might be an interesting way to make a helmet shape. I know that there's like I can add symmetry, which is kind of interesting. So I can add, let's see, how do I make do I have to make a plane in order to make a symmetrical thing here? But I can, do I select two faces? Oh, yep, look, so if I select two faces in this symmetry thing here, now as I go back to edit form, now it's going to work symmetrically, which is kind of interesting. This can be really interesting for, you know, industrial design purposes if you've got an existing like set of components, say like a motor and a battery and a hand grip, and you want to try to make them all, make something that encompasses all of them and looks sleek and cool. Maybe this kind of looks like it's going towards a helmet direction here, but you kind of get the idea. Balls of clay. Alright, so I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click Finish Form, and now we kind of come back to our solid workspace here. So, you know, when I said solid workspace, we've got our kind of workspaces on our top here. So we've got a surface workspace, a solid workspace. The mesh workspace is kind of a whole new area. There's the sheet metal stuff, and then some different tools here. But so if we go back to our create menu, the next item is, I think, that option that I'm going to skip for now. Because the derive, I haven't used a whole lot, frankly, and I'm going to have to learn more about that myself before I start showing people, I think. But the next option is something we're super familiar with, right? Extrude is a pretty simple command. We do it quite often. And we've got a two-dimensional shape. And if I choose this two-dimensional shape as the profile that I want to extrude, and then I grab my little arrow here and I move it up, you can see that we've got a three-dimensional shape here that we created. Now there's a whole bunch of options here in this extrude dialog box. For example, the start of the extrusion doesn't necessarily need to be at the profile plane of our sketch. So our profile plane of our sketch is located right down here, and right now our extrusion starts from that profile plane. However, we could say, hey, don't start extruding that from the profile plane. Start extruding it offset from that ½ an inch. And then we've got kind of a floating object that exists away from our sketch a little bit. And that's really handy depending on how you're able to locate your sketch in order to draw it, what kind of existing planes you have to draw your sketch on. I'll go back to profile plane. And the next option here in our window is this direction. So I could make this extruded out symmetrically from that, right? Or I could just do one side. Or different from the symmetric option is this two sides option. So when I chose symmetric, I had to do the same distance in both sides. Two sides here will let me do a different distance in each direction. So I can go out 1 inch this way, and I could go out 2 inches the other way. I'll change that back to one side just because it simplifies the menu a little bit. Then the last option here is a taper angle. So most of the stuff in the create menu will have these first options. They'll have a start of your extrusion or your start of your creation. They'll have a direction. They'll almost always have a distance. And then the last option is usually either a taper or a twist. So in this case it's a taper. And if we choose to taper this to a negative number, so if we make it like -45, it tapers it inward. And if we make it a positive number, like a +30, it tapers outward or expands outward. I'm going to go ahead and make this back to 0. Oh, not 300. And then I'm going to say, okay, so I've got a body here. I've got two bodies, technically. I'm going to go ahead and I'll name this my Extrude, as we're going through and exploring our tools here. So as you know, in our bodies folder, we've got a little eyeballs next to each one of our bodies, and those eyeballs toggle the visibility of the object, so I can turn them on and off. Let's go ahead and name my body one. This is a form. So we use the form tool to create that. That's not the from. Alright. Alright, so I'm going to turn off my extrude because the next option in our create menu is revolve. So this revolve option here lets us kind of if this was a circle, we'd be making a donut shape almost. I'll select that octagon profile. And now I have to pick an axis to revolve this around. So I'll choose one of the lines, one of the segments of my octagon. And then again here we've got those same options, or similar options I should say. So we've got an angle. This is basically like a distance. So the 360 would be the full distance you could go. Now you could go just half of that. You could go just 180 degrees. And then you've got a kind of interesting shape there. We can also do those two sides, one side option, so or do it symmetrically. So if I do two 180 degree symmetric, if I revolve them 180 degrees in each direction, I have a 360 degree revolution. Or we could choose, two sides and do a different number of degrees in both directions. We've got an operation here, and I've only got one body right now, so it's kind of difficult to show. Well, I guess I could turn on my extrusion here. And if I turn on my extrude body, you can see now the operation, what this operation does. So initially, it was set to new body. So what would happen in this case is I would have an additional body that I would name my revolve body, which is what I'm going to do, but I'll just show you this operation here. We could also change this to cut. So if I clicked OK, right now what it would be doing is using this revolve in order to cut away from that extrude body that I just made. There's also join, and that would kind of add to this body, which is also kind of an interesting shape. So I'd have one body that was made up of the extrusion and the revolve here. The other option that I don't use very often is intersection. So this is kind of the opposite of cutting. This is the shape that would be cut away in the cut operation, but right now it's just the intersection between those two shapes that it's making, right? But I'm going to go ahead and make it a new body. And I'll say OK, and then I'll name that. This is the revolve body here. Alright, so now the next option in our create menu is a sweep. In order to use this sweep option, we need to have a path to draw it on, or a path to sweep it along. So let's go ahead and make that right now. Conveniently, we've got this line here that's already made. I find that my sweeps work out best if the path that I'm sweeping along is at the center of a shape that I'm sweeping, right? And thankfully we've already got this. And I suppose we could talk about 3D sketching when we do this, but let's go ahead, and the first thing we're going to need to do is make a plane in order to sketch on. So we've got a line here, and I can use my construct menu. Maybe I can illustrate this. So I guess in theory we could use one of our existing planes that Fusion gives us, but it's kind of nice to be able to know you can make a plane wherever you need to make a plane. So I'm going to go ahead and choose from my construct menu this plane at an angle option. So if I choose plane at an angle here, and I choose the line that I made, that construction line that goes from the center of my octagon out, Now this is where you'll have to kind of look at things. So I want my plane to be 90 degrees to what it is right now. So I don't want it to be at the same, I don't want this plane that I'm creating to be on the same plane or at the same angle of the plane that I drew on originally. I want it to be 90 degrees offset from that, or at a 90-degree angle to that. This may be different for you if you're drawing along with us. Planes and negative numbers and angles are kind of sketch dependent on which plane you started with and a whole lot of things. So you kind of just have to kind of look at things and say, all right, yep, 90 degrees from that is what I want. And then I'll say OK. And now we can draw a sketch on this plane that we just made. So we learned that tool already. So if we come up to the Create menu and then choose Create Sketch, now we can draw a sketch on this plane here. Now I mentioned when we're making a path that we're going to sweep along, you need to have a shared point. So there needs to be a point on the shape that you're sweeping, so our octagon, and our path that live at the exact same place in space. And the way that we make sure we do that, well, I suppose there's two ways. So we're talking about more than one way to skin a cat. We could either, from the Create menu here, come down and choose Project Include, and then Project. And I could project this point right here. If I click on it, it turns purple. And I've got one selected here. And now I've got a point. If I turn my octagon sketch off, you can see I've still got that point right there. The other option, if I hit undo a couple of times, is to go ahead and make my path first. So if I grab, let's say I'm going to grab my spline tool here so we can make a fun looking shape, and I'm going to click and purposefully totally miss the point that I'm trying to aim at right now. I'm going to zoom out because we're going to make a weird, hopefully that's not too weird a shape. I'll just make a weird shape like that. And now I can zoom back in and I can add a constraint that will join these points together or make them coincident on each other. In this constraints menu, there is an option for coincident here. It's the second option from the top. And I can choose, the rule of thumb here that I use is whenever I want something to move, I click on that object first. So the object that I want to do the moving is this endpoint of my spline, and then I want to move it to that center point there. So I didn't have to project it. I could use that constraint to make them pop right on top of each other there. You know, Mike, in the interest of showing options that I don't show a whole lot, there's an option here that I guess I shy away from a lot because I feel like it gets confusing, and it's a checkbox that you don't want to forget to uncheck after you've checked it, and it's this 3D sketch option. So right now my sketch exists on a flat plane. If I have that 3D sketch option checked there, well, let me do it now. If I hit the move command, yeah. So if I hit the move command while I have this 3D thing option here checked, I can move this sketch out in 3 dimensions. So, but again, this can get kind of confusing if you leave that checked and then click Finish Sketch, and then you start a new sketch, and you start drawing. It may or may not, you may or may not be drawing on a 2D surface. So things can get kind of wonky pretty quickly if you forget to uncheck that. But it's kind of cool that you can make a path like this that's 3-dimensional. I do this sometimes this operation that we're doing right now, because sometimes I'll make an enclosure for like a piece of electronics. I'm going to go ahead and click Finish Sketch here. And I'll want to model all my wires, because wires take up a lot more space on the inside of a little box than you think they do, right?
Yep.
And so sometimes I'll model the wires. Sometimes I'll even kink the wire and then like measure how much of a curve can I make out of this wire, out of my solid core, or whatever it is. You know, and then I'll make sure that I have those kind of constraints built into my sketch here. So now this whole reason we were doing this, we made this sweep. That's my sweep path, is to use the sweep command. So if I click on create and then come down here to sweep, and now the thing that the sweep window here is asking me to do, if I just move on my mouse, it says select sketch profiles or planar faces to sweep. So I can pick my octagon there, and then I can pick my path, and it'll go ahead and sweep it along that path.
Okay.
Now, I mentioned that most of these dialog boxes will have kind of an extra option. So here we get a distance. You know, this distance is 1. You could think about this as kind of like the angle being set to 360 degrees. So it's like full. If I want to go only half of this line, I could just go 0.5, right? I don't think it'll let me go further than that. Yeah, it won't let me go further than 1. The options, most of these dialog boxes give you 1 option. This gives you 2. So I can taper this like I can in Extrude. So I could taper this like -5. Oh yeah, that goes down real quick. -1. And then it kind of tapers down really slowly. I can also, let's change that back to 0. I can also give this a twist. So I can twist this at like 360, so it twists around exactly 1 time and get a weird twist like that. The orientation here doesn't always, depending on your sweep path, you'll have to mess with the orientation. So you can see now the angle of the end of my little sweep here is kind of at a weird angle here, and it's trying to make it perpendicular, I guess. It's not really doing a very good job of it to my original profile. So a lot of times, oh hey, you totally failed at completing a distance there. Let's go back to perpendicular. Maybe it got messed up when I had a twist angle. If I change my twist angle, nope. Yeah, I'm not sure. So it's trying to keep the profile that it's sweeping, kind of like when you're drawing with a calligraphy pen. You know, if you maintain this angle of your calligraphy pen as you're drawing around, you kind of get a different shape. So that's kind of what this is got going on here. It's trying to maintain the angle of this sweep, and it gets to this point here, and it comes down to where you're sweeping 0 right now, because it's just a 0-dimensionally, 2-dimensional shape here that it goes. I can't go any further than that. But if I draw this back, we could see, we could see that profile plane is trying to maintain that parallel angle there. Alright, so we'll change that to 1, and then I'll say okay. Now, just like our original, our Revolve or any of these things, we've got this operation here, and like I said, I could turn on this extrude here, and now I could cut away from it, or I could join to it, right? I'll go ahead and just make this a new body again, and I'll say okay. Alright, so this is our sweep. Let's go ahead and turn that off. What is the next option? Loft. All right, cool. So, Loft is a way to take two shapes and kind of combine them together. You can also loft a shape into a point, which is kind of interesting. So we could do that with what we have drawn right now without having to draw another shape. I could use this loft option here, and I could take my my octagon as the first profile in my loft, and then if I click the plus button here in the profile, so I've got one profile selected, if I click the plus button, now I can pick a second profile. Oh, it doesn't want to let me pick that point, does it? Oh, it does. All right. So I could pick just a point on my path, and it lofts from that two-dimensional shape into this one-dimensional shape. This is very similar to if we were to choose to extrude this and taper it. So here we have like a specific point that we're tapering to. The other way that we can use this loft tool, I'm going to go ahead and click cancel, is if we have a second shape to loft it to, right? And the way we're going to want a second shape that does not exist on the same plane as this first shape does. And the way that we do that, as we learned just a minute ago, is by in the construct menu we have to create a new plane to draw on. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and grab a offset plane, and I'm going to, as the plane that I'm offsetting from, I'm going to pick my sketch, and now I've got a little blue arrow, and I can drag this up, let's say 3 inches, and I'll go ahead and say OK. Now I've got a new plane over here. I should have been naming these planes as I go. I'm pretty good at naming my sketches and my bodies. I'm not so good at naming my construction planes. But I encourage people to do that. So this plane here was the plane I drew my sweep path on. And maybe you don't have to call it sweep path plane because it's in the construction folder, so obviously it's a plane, but just for the sake of organization here. Alright, so let's turn off my sweep path just so that's not in our way and kind of cluttering things up. I'm just going to hit the eyeball on that. And now I can draw a sketch on this new plane. So in this create menu, I can come and grab a new sketch, and I can choose that plane that I'm going to draw on. Now, something that you might notice here that is different from the first time is normally when you say create sketch and then you choose a plane to draw that sketch on, immediately the view kind of spins you around so you're looking directly down at that sketch. However, it did not do that for me, and that is because I did not uncheck this 3D sketch option. So this is where people can get into trouble, is they start sketching, and if I were to start sketching right now, I would be drawing kind of a shape here, and if I look at this shape, you can see that it is not confined at all to a single plane. So beware. It looks two-dimensional from one direction, but as soon as you start moving around, you go, wow, that's on every plane you could possibly think of. Alright, so I'm going to undo, I'm going to uncheck that 3D sketching option, and now I can draw my next shape. So this shape doesn't need to be located anywhere. Unlike that that path, we really needed to have a point that was kind of common to both of them. I could draw this second shape anywhere, so within reason, I guess, right? So if I grab my, I'll just go ahead and make a circle. And I'll make a center diameter circle just to keep things easy here. And I'm going to place it off to the side. Like 3 inches is fine. And I'm not going to worry about kind of fully constraining this because we're just trying to demonstrate the Loft tool. And I'll go ahead and say Finish Sketch. So now you can see we've got these two sketches that are offset from each other. And now using that Loft command, I can pick my first shape, and then again I'll hit the little plus button here in the profile section of my Loft window, and then I'll pick my second shape. Now I could, you could Loft many times, so let me just turn on that another sketch here, because now I could grab this plus button again and I could choose like a point on that line there, and it lofts a third time. You can do this as many times as you want to and create lofts between them. So you can see something that's different about this loft is now, here I'll go ahead and get rid of that third profile. So here it lofts kind of straight between the two of these shapes here, as straight as possible. Gosh, I probably should have drawn this a little bit differently. Do I want to try doing this again? Just because you can use a path and a loft at the same time, and that'd be a really cool way to show that. So let's do it this way. So here you can see it's going straight, and if I hit the little plus button here and add a third profile, I'll just add that little point there. Now it kind of changes the way it's transitioning from this first one. It's kind of trying to make a nice sweeping path between those shapes. There is a way to control the path that makes in a loft. And we kind of have one over here. So I'm going to go ahead and click Cancel. And I'm going to turn on my sweep path, because I wish I would have thought this out a little bit differently. So here is our timeline down at the bottom, and I'd like to change some things about how I drew this. So if I right click on this option where I made my construction plane and say Edit Feature, now I go back in time to when I was making this construction plane, and can I just click on that point? Sure can't. That's the plane that I'm offsetting, and there's really not a way to make it exactly on that point there, but that's okay, I think. So I can't do it that way, but I wonder now when I made my sketch here, if I right click on that and say Edit Sketch, what I'm trying to do is make the center of this circle appear right on this path here, and I think I can do that. I can project that point. So in this Create menu here, if I come down here to Project and then maybe Intersection, if I choose this intersection option, look at that, nice. So I can see a little red dot appearing there. So if I pick the geometry that I want to try to find the intersection of, this path here, and then I say OK, it gave me a little point here. So now I can use my coincident constraint And I can say, hey, make this circle coincident with that right there. And now I can kind of continue showing this here. So now if we go back to that loft option, so now I've got a loft, I've got two shapes along a path, and I could loft between those and then use that path as a guide. So I can choose that first option and that first profile, and I'll hit the plus button. I'll choose my second profile, and then I'll hit the plus button, and I will choose the very end point over here. And now I can say, hey, as a guide type, use a center line, and my center line is going to be this guy right here. Oh, is it going to crash? Loft would flow. Oh, there we go. All right. So it took a minute, but there's a funny looking shape, and so you can see the first part of it has got this angle, definite angles on it, and then from there on out, it's going to be nice and smooth and circular. Now I could have other sketches on here that would change the shape again. In this particular example, this is not super useful, but I'm sure that there are reasons to make weird lofted shapes like this. And again, I could add, oh, that's interesting. I'm not sure what this does. Analysis. Ooh, things get colorful. I'm not delved into this tab here, but you know, maybe this is worth further looking into. I'm not sure what this is telling me, but it's probably useful for something. But anyway, so I thought we could find a twist here, but I guess it makes sense that you can't really twist if you're telling it to go from one shape to another, or taper, for that matter. But I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, I wonder if it's going to make it all weird colored like that. So I clicked OK, and now my computer is taking a pause. There we go. All right. So now I've got my loft with path. All right, the next option in our create menu is this rib tool here. So I've never actually made a rib before. So it looks like uses an open sketch curve to create a thin feature. The rib is created planar parallel to the sketch plane. Select a curve and then specify a thickness. So it looks like this is a really specific tool here to create like little gussets, I guess you could say. I'm going to turn off my octagon sketches and my sweep paths, and I'm going to go ahead and make a new sketch. And on this sketch, I guess I'm going to make that really basic kind of bracket scenario. So if I make this like 5 inches and I make this like 1, and then I do the same thing again if I make a real simple kind of L shape here, and make that 4 inches. And then it seemed like all we had to do was to have an open sketch profile. So in the example, it was a straight line. I'm kind of wondering if it has to be a straight line. Could it be a curved line like this? So if I make just an arc,
Might go the opposite way with the rib, but yeah.
Yeah, oh well, that's true, that's true. This will be a not very strong rib. But now if we grab that rib tool, actually I bet we first have to extrude out this shape here. So here's an occasion where symmetric really comes in handy, because we want that rib to be kind of right in the middle there. So this is an occasion where having a symmetric extrusion lets us have all that sketching on the same sketch here. What's this sketch? Unknown. This is my rib. And now if I go ahead and create a rib, and then say 0.5. Okay, so that made a totally filled in section there. I'm not sure. Well, here I got two options. Oh, here we go. All right, so if we change it, if we change this depth option instead of to next to depth, then we get this kind of multi-directional arrow here, and now I can control like the width of the rib and the thickness out there, and it looks like it's making that sketch line the inside of that rib. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and, can I say flip? Oh yeah, look at that. If I click flip here, it flops it to the inside. So now that this flipped option kind of controls if my rib is the outer diameter or the inner diameter, I suppose you could say. Alright, so if I click on OK, it looks like the last option that we'll have time to look at, ooh, rib. And I bet we'd have to have a whole lot of sketching in order to draw that. But emboss, have you done an emboss before?
On a lathe.
Okay, cool. So an emboss is kind of cool. Can we
That
do?
was more of a knurl.
Okay. Here we go. You know what? Let's do this. We've got a curved shape here. Now, if we wanted to put lettering on this curved shape, if we wanted to put lettering on this flat side, super easy, right?
Yes.
We could do that with an extrusion. Nothing to write home about. If you want to write lettering on a curved shape, then this emboss feature is super handy. So I'm going to go ahead and create another plane. And I'm going to make this plane exist kind of over here at kind of a 45-degree angle. In fact, actually, I bet I can say make a tangent plane. I bet I can make this work with a tangent plane. So if I say construct here and then I say tangent plane, I can pick this curved face as the tangent here, and now I can, this doesn't really matter a whole lot, but I'll kind of make it like, you know, roughly 45-degree angles like that, and then click OK. So now I can create a sketch on that plane. Create sketch, and then I'll pick that plane, and now I can write some text on here. So in this create menu, I can come down here to text, and I'll draw out a text box. Oh boy, I hit escape when I didn't mean to. Alright, now I'm in my text box. I try to click out here and to make text, but I have to click here. Is that how you spell emboss? That's how you spell emboss, right?
Yeah.
Close enough. Alright, so I can change the size, the height of this text. Let's make it a 1/2 inch there. And I'm just going to move it into place now, because I want to rotate it 90 degrees. And I'm just going to move it so it looks like it's floating right over our curve here. And I'll say OK, and then finish sketch. Now, I did text just because I guess text is useful to put on things sometimes, right? Especially if you're going to emboss something. But this could be any sketch. It could be a series of lines. It could be some squares. You can make a pattern like you've been messing around with. But now if we choose this create menu and then this emboss option, we pick the sketch that we want to emboss, and then the face that we want to emboss or deboss into or from, and then we kind of pick a direction here. So here we're kind of making an emboss. If we go the opposite direction, we can make a deboss, so that's going to cut into the face there. And I can say OK. And now if I turn off, let's go ahead and name this. There's my embossed text right into my shape.
Cool.
Yeah, so anytime you're trying to like draw into a curve, sometimes if you're making like a grip, like a hand grip or something like that,
yeah,
you need to have some texture in it. That emboss or deboss is a good way to do that. That kind of brings us like to the end for today. This is kind of interesting. You know, this is like I said, this is the plus of like when you're the only one in class. You can just be like, hey Carl, this is what I want to learn. Let's start at the top of the menu and go all the way down. You know, maybe we'll do this again. I think this is a fun exercise. And, you know, a good way for beginners too, I think for sure.
Yes.
To be like, hey, what do all these tools do? Like, let's go from top to bottom. Just show me.
Yeah. That's why I asked.
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate you, Mike. You know, maybe I would encourage you to pick it up from here. Like, you know, you've used the whole command. I know you've used the whole command before. I know you've used thread.
Yeah.
You know, like box and cylinder and sphere. A sphere is super useful. It's difficult to make a ball without the sphere command. I guess you can revolve a half circle, but you know, some of these things save you a lot of steps if you don't want to have to make a two-dimensional shape first. But you know, maybe mess around like with a coil. And yeah, like I said, we'll probably do this again. This kind of like exploring the create menu kind of thing. And you know, it might be useful to, you know, explore every option in the sketch create menu too. That might be another good one. But until next week, we might continue drawing our Power Wheels car next week if more people are here. Otherwise, this will be another episode of Let's Do What Mike Wants. So, all right, cool. Thanks, Mike. And yeah, that's it.